Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mind Matters, where if it's on your mind, it matters. The podcast for love, life, and learning. I'm your host, Nate Shear, and today we have Scott. Introduce yourself, Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott. I'm an air traffic controller stationed out here at Kadena Air Base on Okinawa.
Awesome. I'm super excited today. This is the first and only time I've been able to interview someone from a previous career field I had. So super excited to talk to somebody about something I actually know somewhat about, which will be super exciting. So we're going to start off with a quick 3-part question to get this rolling, get us to understand you a little bit better in a short amount of time. So first part of the question is, what's one app you are using?
I am using the Libby app. I just started using it when I got out here because I was using Audible, and I kind of was really limiting my number of books I was able to read, and I found out that it's free, and so I've been using that all the time now. So,
oh, you can't beat it. Which library do you have? Your
DoD,
own library?
No, the DoD library.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, sometimes if it's out at your regional library or whatnot, you can bounce back and forth. My wife does a lot of reading, and so she'll kind of bounce libraries to get the one that she wants.
I have one from back home, but the audiobook selection, which is what I usually like, isn't as dense as a DoD library is, so I've been using that one quite a bit.
That's awesome. Second part, a book you recommend.
Oh, man. There's so many. Kind of old news, but I just read it recently. Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I absolutely love it. I'm not even going to try to explain it because I'll butcher it, but I really enjoy it. It's kind of his take on what makes people successful, and I found it fascinating.
Nice. I've never read it. What was the biggest takeaway?
Oh, man. There's a lot. His take, and it's something he kind of maybe pushed me towards that we have this idea that success, especially in the United States or here in our country, that we're used to is like, oh, he just worked hard or she just worked hard and got over there. Yes, that's a huge part of it. But there's so many other little things, just circumstance, timing, whatever it may be, that go into success. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think now, lately, with social media and things like that, we see the end result of success, but sometimes you don't see the 48 tries before they hit the 49th, things like that. Yep. So it is that's a good point to keep in mind. There's so many things that go into success. Mm-hmm. And the last part of the question is, what are you listening to?
I'm listening to The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William R. Shirer, I think his name is, but nice. It's a long one. It's kind of pretty bland, but it's all right. But I'm just getting through it at this point.
What's your takeaway from that one?
I mean, it's like 1,000 and some pages long, so I'm not very far into it yet. But Hitler's a bad guy. I don't know. Yeah,
that's a good takeaway. Okay, I'll move into the heart of the show, the AFSC portion. So, what's your AFSC? And what's the official title?
1 Charlie 1, air traffic controller.
Nice. How did you find or become interested in the field?
So my grandfather was an air traffic controller for a very long time. And then when I decided I was going to join the Air Force, my dad was also, many men in my family have been in the Air Force. So my father he was a maintainer. My grandfather was a air traffic controller. And so he told me to do that. So I did it. I'm so glad.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a funny story. I went to MEPS. I wanted to come in guaranteed air traffic, and I was moving through the process. Everything was going good. And then I did the depth perception, and the lady looked at me, looked back at the sheet, and looked at me, and she's like, "You failed miserably." I was like, "Really?" I drive, I do certain activities. I didn't think I didn't have depth perception. So I was like, "Does that make sense?" And then she paused, looked back at the thing. She said, "Oh, wrong score sheet. You're fine."
Oh my goodness.
So this lady with one fell swoop could have just destroyed my life. So.
And that got a lot of people. It's not even a thing anymore, actually, for air traffic.
Oh.
I don't know when within the last however many years that's changed. But I've heard that story a lot. That's happened to a lot of people. Almost happened to you.
I did not know that.
They actually got rid of it, yep.
Well, that's good. I'm glad they moved on with that. So we'll move in to learn a little bit more about you. So who are you? Tell us as little or as much as you want.
Oh, man. I'm not a big titles guy, but if you want to do that, I'm a father. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And then outside of that, I am just kind of along for the ride. I don't know. I'm not, like I said, I'm not good with titles, but I have a handful of hobbies. I like spending time doing those things as much as possible. I love my job. But it's hard for me to really attach a title to it. I think it's kind of weird to say, like, to me, saying I am a hunter, I'm a whatever title. It just makes me weird. It makes me feel weird. Excuse me.
So many activities out there that makes sense. Can you give us an overview of your career field, not the Google version?
Oh man. So, if you want to look at air traffic, I imagine many people listening to this have been on a plane at some point. So we kind of, as air traffic controllers, help, safely, orderly, and expeditiously kind of get you from point A to point B, all the way from when they're, filing the flight plans. We relay those to you in between facilities and then taxi you from your parking spot all the way out to the runway, clear for takeoff. And then as you move through the air, you're talking to different controllers, all the way to your destination.
Can you walk us through some of the different types of jobs and positions that fall within air traffic?
Oh man, there's a lot. So there's two sides of air traffic. So it's the same AFSC, but they're kind of two, branches of the same tree, really. You've got the radar portion and the tower portion. So within a tower, you generally have a ground control position, which is talking to all your vehicles, your aircraft, your vehicles taxiing around or driving around the airport, your airplanes going to and from the runway to their parking. And then you have a local controller position, and they're talking to the planes in the air in the immediate vicinity of the airport. And then down in the radar, there's a lot in the radar, but basically it's just, different sectors of airspace. There's different controllers within there that have different responsibilities. And then the person in charge of each one of those rooms, whether it's up in a tower cab or in a RAPCON down on the radar, is called a watch supervisor. And they're in charge the whole, they're listening to multiple frequencies, positions, kind of making sure everything runs smoothly.
That's awesome. So I have this question on the script. So since you brought it up, I'll jump to it. Have you been a watch supervisor?
I have been. Yep. I've been a watch supervisor since about 2013.
Awesome. So I have to ask the question, what's it like having voices in your head?
Oh yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot sometimes. My wife has told me, especially, you get very good, or I have gotten pretty good at kind of selective hearing. You're able to tune things out, and with multiple people, agencies, whatever, talking at the same time. It's very interesting how little snippets of words or sounds you can kind of key in on, and the inverse of that, tune out a little bit. And it's got me in trouble, but it's good.
That makes sense. I remember from tech school, one of the things they tried to encourage us to do was to try to have a phone conversation with like family members, and then try and watch TV and try to see if you could keep up with the TV show and also keep up with the conversation with your family. So it's a good skill, I think. I don't know the selective, listening out or selective hearing portion, but it's definitely good to be able to keep track of all that.
Two sides to everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. Two sides. So I'd like to ask you, what's one personal lesson you've learned that you think everyone should learn in life?
In life. All right.
Big, right?
Yes. Good. I like it. I think that struggle, like introducing struggle or discipline, however you want to phrase it, doing hard things. This isn't my idea. I'm just regurgitating things that, I've heard, but then I've implemented, have worked for me. But doing hard things intentionally, like on your own, makes hard things that happen to you, that are more or less out of your control, makes them, in my experience, infinitely more tolerable.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. It's interesting. In the military, we love this reference of like the rubber band and resiliency and all these buzzwords on bouncing back. But I don't think we do a good job of explaining like what we mean by bouncing back. We don't talk about pushing through the difficult times, so the next time you see it, you're more likely to deal with it.
Yes, and even if it doesn't even have to be the same thing, but it can be as simple. For me, it's exercise. I'm a bit I just love, physically hard things. But the thing that makes most of the things that I do that you would classify as physically hard is actually the mental side of it. Because a lot of times I do things I don't want to do. I'll tell myself the night before, all right, here's what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm all excited about it, wake up, actually go to do it, and I regret it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do some portion of it, whatever it may be. But when I do that, I get through that. I'm not getting through a physical thing. I'm getting through me telling myself, you have to do this. You will do this. Mm-hmm. And the things that I find that I care about or that may bother me or give me, issues beforehand and then after I do that are infinitely different and smaller. Like the things that would bother me if I'm not able to do that, if I push myself through, whatever it may be, whatever challenge, and I push myself through that, things that would otherwise bother me don't. And then also you just build that resilience that you talk about. Like, oh, I can do this. Like, this is hard, but this will end if I just keep going here. And it's helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's difficult. Again, going back to like the social media aspects of things, we see the pictures of the family vacations and all the good stuff, but there's so much more that's going on behind the scenes. And so one of the aims of this podcast is clearing the stigma with mental health, and that's why we're calling it mental fitness here. Something that you're actively working on, the same way you go to the gym and get reps in, you should be finding ways to exercise your brain and meditate or yoga or, whatever form or fashion that is. So we'll continue to have conversations about mental fitness and ways that you can get through things. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a really good way to address that and understand that, because you have to get through the hard stuff so you can look back and realize you accomplished something. We want to, for some reason, feel like, oh, I want life to be easy. You want life to be sort of difficult so that it could be easier.
Yes. And if you look, generally, or a large percentage of my fond memories that I have of things I've found are like things that were actually horrible in the time. Like, it was whatever it may be. It was a hike to the top of some beautiful peak, whatever it may be. It was whatever. I like to hunt. So I've been on some hard hunting. It rained for 4 days. I was sitting in a tent, but things like that. But looking like, yes, those 4 days in that tent were horrible and miserable. But at the end of it, I look back like, man, that was awesome. It was just, that struggles, it's good for you, I think, in many ways.
I think the perfect example is the deployment. You hear, oh, we had to do this, we had to use porta potties, we had to do this. And at the end of the story of all these things that sound terrible, they're like, it was awesome.
It was awesome. Yeah, like, exactly.
Wait, you just told me like 10 things that were not awesome. The opposite of awesome.
Yep.
But the stories and the camaraderie and whatnot, I think are super important. So that's a great example. We'll move on to the next question. This one might be difficult. I throw it in here. It is kind of a difficult question. But how do you describe a typical day or week in your job, and what are some of the main responsibilities and challenges you face? So, do you want my job specifically, or as an air traffic controller in general? I'd like to hear about being on crew and your point of view.
Great. So, as an air traffic controller, generally, many facilities within the Air Force and just nationwide really are 24/7. So a lot of people are working rotating schedules. So you'll go in, your assigned time, you kind of roll in generally as a crew, they call it. Like you said, you'll roll in with the guys you're working with on that shift, and then you'll get briefed in, and then you'll plug into whatever position it may be. And then you're working, right? And you'll rotate through the positions throughout the day. Generally speaking, you have a good idea of like when it's going to be busy, when it's going to slow down. So, you talked about watch supervisor. They'll kind of coordinate with, getting you in and out of position to accomplish, behind the scenes type stuff. But you're either in your radar, in your radar room, or you're up in the tower and you're doing that. Some challenges, no different than any other job, right? It depends on, what's going on, whether it's manning or the weather or just other stuff, whatever it may be. But just, it's really, as an air traffic controller, if there's no planes flying around, like you got nothing to do. So it's pretty easy, right? But once, as things start to happen, and it can happen in, kind of very short notice in a quick amount of time, it can go from nothing to, kind of your hair on fire a little bit. So
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because I hear the question a lot. It's like, oh, isn't that so stressful? I'm like, most of the time, clear to land, clear to take off, pretty
Yes.
straightforward. But when you have, someone hit a bird and they have to come down, and then the person behind them is the medical emergency, and then the T-38 that you squeezed in front of them pops a tire, and then it all happens, and then somehow. You're trying to come off your mid shift, so you want to go home, and then the street sweeper catches on fire, and you got to ring out the crash phone. And you're like, how did all that happen at one time?
Yeah.
So, what do you say about the questions? Like, isn't that stressful?
So that's same thing. That's what I hear. First thing I always hear, air traffic control. Oh, isn't that stressful? Yes. My retort to that is always, flipping burgers at McDonald's is stressful if you don't know what's going on, right? And I can say that I worked at McDonald's. I thought it was very stressful at the time. But at the same time, I love that part of the job. That is my favorite part of it, when it is just, controlled chaos to a degree. There's planes everywhere. Whatever. I really absolutely love it. I'm very lucky in that regard, that when there are, situations you talked about, planes, emergencies, just general chaos on and off the airfield, it's just, I love it. I love it.
That's awesome. It works for you. So, speaking of shifts, are you 4 and 2 here, or 6 and 3, or what's your breakdown?
Our manning's kind of crazy. So generally, we try to do 4 and 2, but it's kind of a month to month type thing. We're kind of playing catch up still from COVID, unfortunately, because they paused a lot of guys in training. So we're paying for that right now. We try to do 4 and 2s, but a lot of the time, sometimes it's 6 and 2s, unfortunately. But
could you tell us a story about when something went from boring to crazy, and maybe back?
Oh man, there's so many, and I would almost get too into the weed, like to try to describe it. I think I get too in the weeds in air traffic. I can say kind of a funny story that I like to tell. Yes. There was a. So you mentioned T-38s earlier. So I was like, my joke was like, I've seen T-38s make a kid quit. So there was a time you can't really do it anymore, but you used to be able to do a thing called fear of controlling. I don't know if that was a thing when you were doing it.
I think so.
But where you can just kind of like, hey, like I just, for all the right reasons, like saying being a pilot, like I don't want to fly this plane. Like, okay, you don't have to be a pilot. We're not going to make you fly. You can do the same with controlling. So anyway, a kid was in there. He was in training. He was in the local control position. So he's talking to the planes in the air, kind of in the immediate vicinity of the airport, which is generally the most complex position in a tower. So anyway, he's in there. He's in training. He's kind of having a rough time. His trainer was kind of, getting on him a little bit, and I could see that he was not doing so well. So I told the trainer to kind of lay off him a little bit, take it easy. So anyway, we're going through. It's kind of slowed down. It's very easy. Whatever. And I was at Little Rock at the time, which is just all C-130s, right? So they're very slow. They're just kind of cruising around. Anyway, some T-38s come down final. And as a joke, I wasn't trying to jive. I wasn't trying to poke the guy or anything. I just said, hey man, they're doing 350 knots. What are you going to do? And he just takes off his headset. Says, I can't do this anymore. This isn't the job for me. I'm done. And unplugs and whatever. The rest is history. Obviously, he's not doing this anymore. So that's I would say that kind of that escalated quickly. Yeah. So
life comes at you fast.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So we'll go to a more positive note, or what are some of the things of the job you'd like to highlight?
Oh man, it's for me, again, take it with a grain of salt because I absolutely love it. I think it's what I was made to do. I'm just very lucky that I found it. But I think controlling the chaos and the constant, if you're at somewhere where they're, like a Kadena, like some other places in the Air Force, where it is very busy, it is very dynamic, it is very fluid. You are constantly and consistently having to just think on your feet, adapt, and just, there's no, A plus B does not equal C. That is not what it is. There are general, the principles are few, but the methods are many. There's a million ways to get from A to C. Some are better than others, right? But just kind of controlling that chaos with there's an infinite number of factors that are going to change second to second how you have to respond and react to any given situation. I love that part of it.
I love how you said that you were made for it or it's a match. Because one question I've heard is like, am I smart enough to do it? And I think it's a weird correlation between like intelligence and the career field. You either like understand it or you don't. You know how the puzzle comes together, how the spatial things work, and what the separation is, and things like that, or you don't. So some people are like, I can't do it. I'm not intelligent enough or whatnot. But I mean, there's some that are super smart, some that may not be as much, but they just understand. So it's a fit.
And I've had we've had that conversation as controllers a lot. And I don't think it's an intelligence thing at all. I think it's just, how does your brain work? Like, a lot of the people who have not made it in the career field are some of the smartest people that I've come across ever. They can quote every reg, do it, but like I was talking about earlier, just that dynamic, constantly changing, fluid situation, applying said rules that you can quote off the top of your head. It's just a completely different game. And some people, it's not an intelligence thing. I think it's how your brain works. See, I'm not smart. Like at all, I promise.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the people I've known that are more the bookworm, I feel like were not as able to apply it as much. It seems like almost counterintuitive to what you think. Like if you know all the rules, you could apply it, but it doesn't seem to play out very often. Next question. What do you think is the most rewarding aspect of your career field?
So for me, it's just when it is, like we've talked about a few times, and just kind of that chaos, that controlled chaos, just coming out the other side of that. Like, and it is just you almost get a high from it. There's a few times, like it happened, was it 26, the kid got rated. So like it was crazy. Like it was it was very crazy. It was nuts. And it kind of, it happened. We went through it, and then they all kind of landed. It calmed down, and everybody's kind of like looked around like, whoa. And just kind of like, but just, we're on like, like a high. I don't even know how to show you. Just kind of have like a high, like, holy cow, we just did that. Like we did it, like we're all fist bumping each other. Like it was super lame, but it was just that, like getting through that, like that was awesome. And at that point because when it is that busy, no one person can just, you cannot maintain situational awareness of all that at one time. So everybody's in there working together, helping each other out. People who should have nothing to do with it are over there doing every little thing they can to help. And it's really cool that coming out the other side of that together. And I just love it. And like, I've also been lucky enough to be at some bases that have some like, kind of direct like missions that are very like you can see the results of, or you kind of find out what's going on. It's very cool. So I also like that too. I like that portion of it. It's kind of an Air Force answer, but I really do enjoy like, what we're kind of finding out, like what you're supporting. You realize like, oh, all these jets are out doing this or what it may be. And like what you're able to kind of directly like facilitate in many ways is cool to me.
That's interesting. Yeah. There's something I wanted to ask. It actually is coming up, but I'll move it up. It's interesting you mentioned the high. And so there was something I remember when people would work a difficult position, usually on the day they were getting rated. We would find that right after they got rated, they would completely like zone out. So we'd try and rip them out of position. Oh, yeah. Have you? Oh,
absolutely. We did that with that kid. We're like, you kind of, so the way it works in air traffic, right, for the audience is, until you are fully certified, right? You go to the tech school, you get to your facility, you start training, you go through all the positions. But until you are checked out in the entire facility, you can't work by yourself. So you're always, you have a little headset, a little microphone, right? And you plug in. There is always a certified person plugging in with you, right next to you, that has the ability to overkey you at any time. So anyway, so when you do get certified, like you were talking about, you finally get facility certified, kind of the big thing is they like they pull themselves out and you're plugged in by yourself for the first time. It's a cool thing. But that lasts for all about 10 seconds. It's like, all right, dude, you can take a break, right? Because it is like that. It is like I stated earlier, it's very, especially those busy things. Like, yes, we have a high, but it's also mentally taxing. Just like it's hard to, it really is like you're on a high, but then it's just hard to concentrate on things. I don't know really how to explain it. We called it at some bases like that period after a very busy period. We call it like dangerously slow, because it's just, there's not enough going on where you really need to pay attention. And then you're just mentally kind of drained anyway. So it's harder for you to pay attention. And oftentimes like that's when like stuff that wouldn't happen otherwise. So you're right. We try to get people out of there after, real busy.
That's
phases.
interesting.
Yeah.
Like jumping rope super fast or something, and then once the rope slows down, you'd probably just get hit in the shins or something.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
I was used to it going fast.
Yep.
I'm not used to it going slow.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So we'll move over to more of the less desirable. So what are some of the aspects that are, I think you touched on a few of them, but if we could round out a few of them more so people are thinking about cross-training or coming into the career field, what are things that are a little harder to deal with?
So we have, luckily, I will say, like I said, I love my job. So this will be a stretch for me anyway. But like we have crew rest, like it's very forgiving, stuff like that. We're very limited on the number of hours we can work. However, that being said, we are, generally speaking, most facilities are 24/7. So you're going to be working a lot of overnights, a lot of weekends, a lot of holidays, potentially, things like that. So that's something to get used to. It's very like training intensive, especially initially, right? The tech school and then the initial upgrade, qualification training. There's a lot of that. But then every time you PCS, if you can imagine the different, every different Air Force base you've been to is completely different, right? The roads are different, the country's different, everything's different about it. Well, it's no different about every airfield you go to. The runways are different, the planes are different, just everything's different. So you go back into training. So it's obviously abbreviated, right? Because you have experience and generally it won't take as long. But it's not unheard of. It happened here recently, like where you can be an air traffic controller for 6, 8, 10 years and you go somewhere and you just, maybe you just kind of bounced around slower bases or you were only in radars and now you go to a tower and it's just completely different. And, unfortunately, like it's just, you're not, it's hard. So, there's that stressor of it potentially, base to base. It can be, at least for a little bit, like going through training. That nobody likes going through training, so that can be a little stressful.
So one thing we didn't touch on in opportunities is some of that training. So could you touch on being dual rated and kind of how that works?
So yes, like I talked about the 2 branches of the same tree type deal earlier.
But only one WAPS test.
All right.
Come on.
Right. Yeah. It's hard.
That's unfair.
Yeah. So there's tower, right? Which everybody, you see at all the airports, the tower, right? And they're responsible for the airport, the ground guys moving around the ground, and then all the airplanes in the immediate vicinity. So you can imagine they're in a tower. They've got these big windows. You're up there looking down or around at everything. So it's very visual oriented. And then you go down to a radar, and the rules are completely different too. Like it's just, can this plane see that plane? Can I see this plane? It's a lot of that, right? But then you go down into a radar environment. Everybody's seen the radar scope with little green dots, whatever, and that's how you're controlling. So you're going from a 3D environment, you're looking now to a more or less video game, and you have to kind of work it that way. And it's the same thing, but it's not, right? Same career field, but it's completely different. And so for a long time, it was kind of, you got siloed into one or the other. You're a tower and you're, generally speaking, you would more often than not, or very often you would be just tower for your entire career, maybe a RAPCON somewhere, or same thing, radar, right? Because of, like I talked about, the training intensity, since they're so different, you don't want to, as an Air Force, you don't want to send this person somewhere and now it takes them, as a tech sergeant, it takes this person 8 months, a year to get qualified. So they were just kind of keeping people kind of in their lane, right? But there's been a push within the last few years to really kind of, for career broadening, I think it's good, right? It's challenging at times for a lot of people. They don't grasp it very well, or it takes a little bit longer. It's kind of hard on the front end, but I think it's good for the career field. We're getting a lot more people dual rated. I was lucky enough to do it a few years ago. So I like tower better. That's where I grew up. And that's where I came. But I do like, having done that, I was like, this is great. Like, it's cool. It's really just just career broadening. Like you have the entire picture. You're able to see so much more and understand so much more and just effectively do your job. It's a good push. I like it.
Yeah, that promotion test, going from visual, physical separation to like time is
It's impossible. Yeah, if you don't know, yeah, if you're, it's unfortunate if you're in like a tower and
It
yeah,
always
we can get
feels
deep
like
into
when
it.
you're tower, more of the questions are radar.
Yes.
I'm sure that's not the case.
And that's what I felt like. So, and that's the thing. There's so for those of you guys listening, like yes, it's the same career field, it's the same, few like giant regulations. But if you're a tower, you're really only reading chunks of that apply to you. And if you're radar, you're only reading the other chunks that apply to you. And there's a little bit of crossover here and there. But so you go into WAPs and it's like, it's tough. It's tough.
And then you always got to have like Air Force One fly in or something.
Yeah.
Like, that never happened.
Yes,
Come on.
yes. Yeah. That was always a challenge.
That's funny. I wanted to go back and touch on a couple more less desirable things. You do love it, but I'd love to hear your take on like being DNIC. So in most career fields, you can take cough medicine or, something when you're not feeling well. So I should have defined DNIC, duties not to include controlling, but can you touch on, kind of how that's difficult?
Yes. So if you go DNIC, there's a number of things that can DNIC you. Excuse me. You talked about a few of them, but it just means you cannot control until you're seen by the flight doc and they clear you. And so there's a handful of things, some common ones like you talked about, taking a medication, or if I go to the ER on Saturday, whatever, I was sick or whatever it may be, but I'm fine on Monday, I still can't work until I go see the flight doc. There's certain things like that. I throw my back out, I can't take a muscle relaxer until things, just things like that kind of, it creates, I understand it. And there's a reason for it, a good reason, but it does, you talk about resiliency, things like that. It leads, to a stigma like, oh, that, and the career field is doing a very good job of addressing it. But for a long time, there was a stigma like, oh, this person's DNIC, like they just want to get out of work. They just want to do that. But they're addressing that, and it's a good thing. Because that's not always the case, because there were a lot of people that needed help that weren't seeking help. A lot of times because that's just the thing. You're like, I don't want to go to NIC. Like, what will they think? And that is being addressed. And I think it's for the better.
That's awesome to hear. I'm glad to hear that. I remember sitting in the cab and hearing a long list of ailments from people, and they're like, I'm not getting seen. Like, I'm pretty sure like you need to. Yes. Like, that's high blood pressure. I'm not like a doctor, but that's not good. Yeah. I think you're like... dangerously about to be hurt.
Yes.
So that's good. What are some of the duties now that people are getting put into to help use them effectively without some of that stigma?
So I mean, it's not really a whole much. Excuse me. It's not really how they're being used. It's just I think it's called the ATC Strong Initiative. So it's just led, kind of guided discussions being put out there by the chiefs and leadership of the career field, like, hey, this is an issue within our career field. We're losing people because one of the many things is like, if you go to NIC, you are less than or something. People thought, and like, that's not the case. We would rather you go to NIC. We get you the help, even if you don't go to NIC, whatever it is, get the help you need now. And then we can address it, and we'd be, in a better place moving forward than we had so many people like you were talking about, where it's just, hanging on by a thread. It's just out of the fear of going to the flight doctor, return to fly on Monday, right? So, I think we're going in a very good direction with that.
That's great to hear. That's good stuff. So is there not as much of that stigma where like you're affecting and impacting your shift? I think that was like the biggest thing where you didn't want to take your shift out.
Yeah. And that was that was a big part of it. Right. And you still don't want that, but ultimately it's getting to the point now where I think a lot of that in the past was, sure, I don't want to, burden somebody else that have to care for me. But I think even more so potentially it was, I don't want them to think X about me when they have to cover for me. Versus now it's, because there were people like, oh, you're DNIC, it's because you're whatever. But now they're addressing that like, hey, people are getting the help they need, and we will, support them in that. We're not going to, badmouth you, think less than of you, because you're getting the help that you need so you can then help us. So, 6 months from now, you don't have a breakdown, you're gone for ever versus getting some help now and we can use you long term. Air Force, career field, whatever it may be.
That makes sense. You like mids?
No. I haven't worked a mid in a long time. Thankfully. Yes. Not great.
Those
Not
windows
great.
don't hold in any heat.
No, they're tough.
It gets pretty chilly.
Yeah, and then there's silly stuff happens on mids and it's just I worked for a long time. I worked 2 days, 2 swings, 2 mids, 2 off. So
yeah, it's a rough schedule.
Yeah, you're just kind of a zombie. You have no.
And I remember when the go pills and no goes came out, and I was so excited because I was like, "Oh, air crew's getting them. Like we're flight meds. We'll probably be in there." And they're like, "No, not for you." I was like, "What do you mean?" I always remember this. The flight surgeon said, "Your schedule is too regular." I was like, "How is 2, 2, and 2 too regular?" But like. They were comparing alert, so like the air crew has to go at a moment's notice, even though the schedule is kind of whacked out of its mind.
Yeah, that was a tough one. It was you're kind of sleeping in shifts, and you're like your days of the week are replaced with this is my second day shift, this is my first mid, and you just have no idea of. Yeah, it's a Friday, it's a Tuesday. Like
inside of a building, if I couldn't see, the sun and whatnot, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you what time of day or like relatively if it was night or day.
No
sometimes.
idea. No idea.
That was crazy. And then, only getting like 4 hours of sleep was pretty rough. But going to the DMV on a Tuesday and having me empty was pretty cool.
There are advantages, right?
Yeah. The crew used to sometimes roll to midnight showings of brand new movies, which was kind of cool. We were already up, so it's like, let's just roll over there.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. I'd like to hear a little bit more about, we talked about flight med briefly, but what is that day once a year where you got to go over to the clinic and do all those tests?
Yeah, PHA. So you got to do that annually. I did that Tuesday. Yeah. So I did it a few days ago.
Fresh in your mind.
That's right. Tuesday. They're really good about it here. They're quick. So you go in, there's multiple portions of it. You take an audiogram. So you go sit in that booth,
click it like crazy.
The tone if you're hearing it. Yep. And then, there's a vision part of it. I failed my vision test last year, so I had to get glasses. It's great. And then, just your standard medical checkup outside of that,
Color vision?
Color vision.
Did they get rid of it?
I think it's an initial thing and you pass it once and you're done. I don't know. I've done it multiple times. And I know I've done the one on the computer now too. But I don't know. It's definitely not an annual thing because I haven't done it in a while. But I don't know. I don't know their procedures, but I know what you're talking about because I've done it multiple times.
Because I remember it had color on it. It was the circle with the color. And I remember I had to do one before I cross-trained that was black and white. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm looking for color and there's no color on here. Like, it somehow can tell or something.
Fascinating.
I don't know. I'll have to now look it up and send it to you because it looked similar, but it had a lot less color. So maybe the lack of color proves something. I don't know. It was really weird. Move on to some more positives. I'd love to hear about some unique opportunities that your career field presents.
So we can kind of go everywhere, which is great. There's a radar or tower at most bases. So if you want to, if you're in a career field that's kind of limiting and you want to get something that's a little more wide open, air traffic's one of those. There's a big initiative within kind of the MCA push within the Air Force, something called LZSO, where you kind of go out and, run a landing zone type area. So it's just kind of like a more austere environment, just a dirt strip potentially somewhere. And you're just out there with a radio and potentially a team of a couple other guys, and you're kind of running that landing zone. There's a lot more to it. There's survey and stuff like that. However, the nuts and bolts of it is you kind of get there, assess an area for the feasibility of landing certain types of aircraft there, and there's a process for that, and then do that, and then you kind of just work it from there. Whether it's out, it's kind of just it's a really cool. I've had the chance to do it a little bit, and a lot of people are getting the chance to do it, and it's a cool thing if you like, as opposed to just kind of being stuck within a tower or a dark room somewhere. You can kind of get out and do that. And that's kind of a cool thing they're doing now.
It's a sort of a tangent, but a funny story I was going to mention earlier, but I totally forgot, but you reminded me. So in basic training, there was only 2 of us in my flight that were air traffic. And so I ran over to the guy once I heard, and I was so excited. I was like, oh, why'd you pick this? And he said, because I want to be outside.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh, do you think you're the marshaller? He's like, yeah. I was like, oh, we need to talk. So I had to like talk, and he was so bummed. He wanted to be fresh air and outside. I was like, you're inside all the time.
Couldn't be worse.
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you touched on that, because I wanted to hear if you had any experience with like CRG, because they kind of do some of that, but it sounds like it's expanding from where it used to.
Yep, they do a lot of that, and now there's a few courses they have. There's one up in Yokota, the official one's out in Scott, and they're kind of trying to pop. The MagComs are trying to pop up all over the place, and it's cool. We've actually got to send some people out and do it with the Marines. The Marines have their version of that kind of deal. So we've gotten to send some people down with them. We got to send some people to the Philippines a few months ago to go do that kind of stuff. So it's a cool opportunity, especially if you like I said, you like to get out of the inside office type environment.
That is definitely a unique environment. Have you deployed?
I have.
So for deployment, can you briefly kind of run us through what it looks like when you have fixed wing, helicopters, and drones all playing in the same space?
Well, it's a deployment, so there's less rules. So it's kind of just do what you not right. It's like everybody on deployment, especially with air traffic. So generally speaking, right, if I was to show up at a facility, it's going to take me a few months to get qualified, up to a few months. But if on deployment, you don't have that time. So it's kind of like you're there, and a couple days later, 2-3 days later, the guy you're relieving is gone. So there's not really much of an option. So it's kind of just like a figure it out type deal. So, but yes, it can be kind of chaotic at times.
That totally makes sense. I want to touch on 2 more acronyms that I hope I don't butcher. But ATCALs and TERPs, I think.
Oh, yes. ATCALs. Oh, geez. This is so bad.
Just different
TERPs.
opportunities. You don't have to go super.
Okay, good. Yeah. So TERPs, they build like the,
airspace?
Kind of. They build the airspace for. Again, I'm butchering this. They help design arrivals and departures and figure out, when an airplane's on this kind of arrival, where they have to cross these altitudes, all the kind of the routes getting to and from places that people can do. ATCALs, we don't do a lot with ATCALs anymore. So, yeah. But TERPs is definitely something that people can do, excuse me. Combat airspace is another one where you're going and, like you said, like designing airspaces, deals like that within air traffic. What other opportunities are there? TERPs and combat airspace are 2 of the bigger ones. The CRGs are big ones. Yeah, you can get out a little bit if you look for stuff.
What's the main difference between air traffic, if someone is more familiar with air traffic, and ABM, Air Battle Manager?
I have no idea. I don't know what ABMs do. So I don't know.
Dang, I don't know either. I know they sit up there.
You'll have to find one. I do. That's bad because I do have a buddy who commissioned, and he's an ABM now. But he said, being a prior controller, he gets mad at the ABMs who think that they're air traffic controllers. Take that for what it's worth. I don't know. But I don't know what they do, so I can't tell you the difference. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, it's all good. Just highlighting some things. So that's good. Next question is, can you speak to, this is funny because I just told that story, but common misconceptions or stereotypes about your career field and what it's really like?
So I think people get, the stressful thing. People think it's stressful all the time. That's generally speaking, that's not the case, right? Like I said, there are a large portion, even at, some of the busier bases that you can go to, there are large chunks of the day where there's nothing going on. There's just no planes flying around, right? It's not a, airport that you're flying in and out of, New York, where it's just planes all day, every day, all the time. It's generally speaking at military bases, it's not like that. So there are portions where, and generally speaking, opportunities for you to kind of decompress a little bit, relax. So it's not go, go, go all the time. So
You have to find time to take your proficiency test.
That's right. That's right. It's a proficiency assessment now.
Oh, assessment.
Yes, and you can't fail.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's exciting.
I thought the 3 levels always just took it for everybody.
Yeah. May or may not have happened.
So a question I had just briefly, I thought it was interesting, the position of chief controller. So I've been in air traffic and contracting, and there's terms that kind of confuse people, like contracting officer isn't actually an officer, and the chief controller isn't actually necessarily a chief. Can you kind of describe the role of the chief controller?
Yeah, so the chief controller just oversees, they're the ranking enlisted air traffic controller of the facility. So, well, generally speaking, it's a master, senior, or a chief, depending on the size of the facility. Here at Kadena, it's a senior. Most towers, most of your busier towers, like here, are senior. The chief controllers are generally reserved for larger radars, just because there's more people, and then obviously your staff position, stuff like that. But yeah, they run the, they're in charge of like any other section chief. They're, in charge of that facility.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's funny. I remember, people looking for the contracting officer, and you pointed to like the senior airman, and they're like, "What?" Like, no, that's the contracting officer. Like, I know it seems odd. Yeah. Another funny story, since I love stories, I'll open this one up. The most toured place on base is the tower, giant windows, right? It looks amazing. Yep. And so we had a DV from somewhere in an Asian country, I don't remember where, and he came up and just burst out laughing. And everyone in the tower cab just trying to kind of listen. We're trying to wait. We're waiting for the interpreter because we're not really sure, like, if we did something or something happened. And he translates over to the translator. The translator finally tells us. And the translation was, "I can't believe you allow enlisted to tell your officers where to go."
Oh, wow.
I was like, whoa. And so he said, which I never confirmed to this day, which I should have probably before this podcast, but we're the only country in the world, apparently, that allows E's to control traffic. Don't know if that's certain, but...
We definitely have, if we're not the only ones, we definitely have I think we would be one of the only ones that has such a high percentage. Like, we have all these basically doing it. But yeah, other countries, it's officers or senior enlisted type stuff. They just have a lower percentage of enlisted doing it. So
because the 13 might gets rated, but
once kind of, and then they're done.
Do they really?
Yes.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, I love that story because I love to pass it on to people because we give so much responsibility and empowerment to our people. You got 18-year-old boom operators that are pushing this giant metal tube towards another jet that's worth, the one jet's 100 million and the other jet's somewhere, I don't know, 90 million or something. And, could take out everyone, and air traffic, keeping everyone separated. So these people that are somewhere between 18 and 20, we're empowering them to be able to make these decisions, and just a heavy responsibility, which is super cool.
Yes. And I would say on a day-to-day operation, on a day-to-day level, like a watch supervisor has just the amount of responsibility that they have of just, the potential for things to go wrong, the things that you have to pay attention to all the time on a day-to-day basis. It can be a, brand new staff sergeant, just day in, day out, the amount of responsibility in such a dynamic, situation, or its environment, I should say, it's incredible to me. It blows me away all the time.
It's awesome. We have the greatest Air Force for sure. Little cheesy, little blue, but geez, we do some awesome things. Want to finish out here with a few pieces of advice from you. So what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone starting out in your career field?
Just work hard and appreciate what you get to do. I think, and again, tinted by my rose-colored glasses, but it's just a cool job. It's just a cool opportunity to go to have a front row seat to, especially somewhere here like Kadena, some other bases, especially you have a front row. You get to see an air show every day, potentially. And it's cool. And not only do you get to see the air show, you are in charge of said air show. So I think it's a really cool opportunity to kind of work hard, and then it's a grind, but also like take a step back, kind of like soak in a little bit. It's cool.
Yeah, how can you pass up the gun show?
Right? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
there's something about it. It's just amazing. One of my favorite sites is the B1, heavy B1, sorry.
There you go. That's
All communication with her about heavy aircraft. The heavy B1, full afterburner, all those 4 engines going, just a glorious sight to see, especially at night.
Yep, exactly.
What's the most important personality trait or strength that you think someone needs? We talked about not necessarily intelligence, but what do you think that personality trait is that someone needs in this industry?
Man. The one. I have to narrow it down to one, huh?
The most important.
Oh, man. Adaptability. You got to figure it out. Like, there's going to be,
Time doesn't slow down. They don't stop moving.
Nope, they're not moving while you're thinking. They're not stopping while you're thinking. So, yeah, I would say adaptability is a big one.
Even in holding, they're still moving.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, last question we got. So we're going to intertwine, weave in mental fitness thoughts in every single one of these. These are some of our lighter episodes. We want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. We might have to have Scott back on another episode to talk about more of the heavy stuff later on, but we'll keep it on the light side on this one. So last question, what's a mental fitness thought, tip, trick, or personal story you have?
So I'm lucky. I'm a pretty even-keeled guy, right? But I also, on top of that, I challenge myself every day. And I think something I didn't really mention earlier is it kind of, things I do help me with this, but it can be good on its own, is trying to have just perspective. I think perspective can just, if you take a step back, step up, step out, whatever term for it, and just really a little bit of perspective will make you, it can flip a situation on its head. And I've actually found that a few times. One of the times, recently, like Chaplain came through randomly. I'm in my office doing whatever, and he was just talking to me about just doing Chaplain stuff and just dragging stuff out of me. And then after getting done talking to him, I told him, I was like, man, I really because I was in the office, kind of in the middle, just whatever stuff I didn't want to do, kind of feeling down on myself. And he comes in and he talked to him, and I just, after getting done talking to him, I told him, I was like, man, I got it good. And if I would have he dragged it out of me, but if I would have been able to find a little perspective on my own, you can really realize things may not be as bad or as hard as you think they are. Or if they are, it may be, temporary, whatever time you want to assign to temporary, but it can really kind of help you get through some things, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I remember one time I was in contracting and somebody had complained, made an off comment about having too short of a lunch at an hour or hour and 15 or something. And I always remember that because I always thought I was at Travis at the time, of the flight line workers working 12 hours over 100 degrees, just hiding under the wing just to have 100 instead of 110, and just having a terrible day, and probably would love to get into an AC of any building and have any sort of lunch. They're probably eating out there.
I know a few guys, I don't mean to interrupt you, but no. I know a few guys within air traffic that have the story of how'd you get into air traffic? I was on the flight line. I looked up and I said, what is that? I want to be in there because it's either, 10 degrees below zero or 110 degrees, right? So
I think the only downside to being in the tower is when there's a sweet Kid Rock concert in the hangar at Travis and you're on the night shift watching it from binoculars, and you had to hear how sweet the show was. It was a little sad to hear how cool the whiskey glass spinning on the turntables was, but I could kind of see it, at least the lights flashing from the hangar. So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, that's a super good one. I have a quick story. Again, I love stories. I don't know if I've told this one, hopefully not, but I love learning from life, not necessarily books and things like that. Books are super great, but I feel like when you learn from life itself, it's more meaningful and you remember it better. And so I was taking my son, Ezekiel, to CDC. I flew into the parking lot. I don't remember if I was running late or what was going on, but there was a car parked and it was over the line. And I was so frustrated. was like, this person is inconsiderate. They don't care about people. How could they be over their line? Why didn't they just back up? Why didn't they adjust? And I just went through this huge range of emotion for something that's really minuscule and doesn't really matter. And so I go in, I drop him off, and then I come back. And guess what happened? The car was gone, and I was now over the line because I sidestepped. And so in a matter of a few minutes, the perspective that you talk about, how it just completely flipped. I was so irritated at this person. They were the worst person on earth. And then I was the person. So the next person pulling in is now thinking I'm terrible and I did this and I had no ill intent. I didn't even know I did it. I just did it naturally because they were already over. But yeah, looking at the blank spot that was the car before, no one knows that but me. And so it's a good reminder to myself, like in an instant, just boom, just dropped him off. And now I'm in completely the opposite shoes without really doing anything. So it was really interesting. I will always remember that.
Yeah.
So I want to summarize some of the main points and takeaways. You touched on being able to push through things and having that resiliency. I definitely appreciate that. That is super important. You highlighted some of the really cool things about air traffic and really remembering how cool a job that is with having a daily air show right in front of you and getting paid to do it. So that's pretty sweet. We touched on a few things like having to go through the physical each year, some other small challenges, like not being able to take different medicines and things like that. But you definitely touched on the stigma and the career field going in the right direction, which is super good to hear that people are taking care of themselves. And like you said, not hanging on by a thread and getting the help they need now and taking a few days to have them in the fight for the long haul. So you kind of take the temporary pain to be able to get them back in the fight for the long haul, which is super good. I encourage all of our listeners to share their thoughts and questions on social media. If you do want to share your story on any of your AFSCs or even the mental fitness things that you've gone through or you want to highlight and try to get the message out to other people to try to connect, please let me know and we'll get you on the show. We'll make it happen. But I want to thank you today. Thanks for coming out, Scott.
Thanks for having me. This has been really cool.
Thank you for listening to AFSCs 1 through 9. Remember, exploring different career fields is an important step in finding the right path for you. Like we talked about today, that perfect fit. Join us next time as we continue to explore different career paths and the opportunities they offer. If you have any questions or want to share your story, please contact us. Wow, I got to edit that. We'll see you next time.
That was cool.